95% of our actions on a day-to-day basis are based and automated on subconscious beliefs. We're very rarely not doing something out of habit or consciously making our decisions. So understanding your subconscious is incredibly important, and making sure that it's in alignment with your adult functioning brain is also really important.
Hello, love. Welcome to the Sacred Purpose Podcast, a place where we illuminate your innate wisdom and help you embody your soul's calling. I'm your host, Lisa Malia, midwife, breast cancer survivor, and mama of 3, turned nonprofit CEO and embodiment coach. We're each on a unique path to live our sacred purpose, but we don't need to walk it alone. Through the power of connection, feminine wisdom, and embodied leadership, we can elevate our lives, communities, and businesses. Each week, I'll bring you transformative stories, practices, and rituals to support you in trusting and following your intuition, creating space to live a life of sacred purpose with deeper clarity and unapologetic joy as we reimagine and envision a new way forward. Are you ready? Let's dive in. On today's episode, I get to sit down with my friend, Lindsey Paoli. I can't wait for you to meet her. She is somebody that I have gotten to know over the last year or so. And what I really love about our connection is that Lindsey and I are both Enneagram 7s, if any of you are into personality types and quizzes, and we are both midwives in the feminine leadership archetype. And yet we both have such unique ways of showing up and serving and doing the work that we do. So this is a really fun conversation to dive into, seeing where we cross paths and how we show up so uniquely different in the work that we do. Lindsey Paoli is a former therapist and now executive coach and corporate trainer on a mission to positively impact our current mental health crisis by making proactive mental health approachable and simple, by choosing to work with leaders, entrepreneurs, and directly with companies looking to make a difference. She is taking a top-down approach to mental health, knowing the ripple effect of change that is possible through prevention. She has combined her unique life experiences as the child of a U.S. Air Force efficiency expert, 10 years of leadership and hospitality on Las Vegas Strip, and 7 years of education and private practice as a psychotherapist to create her current role of mindful performance coach. Lindsey offers one-on-one coaching, business consulting, and workshops focused on her signature mind fundamentals formula. She has been trusted to influence and innovate companies such as Sonder and Central Cal Properties, and her story has been featured in Medium, Authority, Thrive Global, and The Daily Flash. Today, we dive into her thoughts on quiet quitting and EMDR, and her transition from therapy into the coaching space and why she chose to make that transition. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and just dive in, grab that cup of tea or coffee, and let yourself just enjoy this conversation. Welcome, Lindsey, to the Sacred Purpose Podcast. I could not be more excited to have you here. I knew the moment that I met you that we were going to be destined to be a part of each other's work somehow or another, but I didn't know how. And yet it was a very slow burn, I felt, for us to get to know each other. And I feel like it's still sort of in that phase, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have you here, to be able to just really get to know more about you and your story and the way that you do the work that you do, because I think it's so powerful and really potent. And I love your approach to it. Thank you so, so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Honestly, I feel the exact same way. It's almost like we're polar opposites, and that's why I'm drawn to you, because where I have weakness, I can see that that's your strength, especially with using your feminine energy. I feel like we say a lot of the same things. You just have a much more graceful way of saying them, and it makes me feel good. And so I just like being around you. So I'm really excited to be here as well. Thank you.
And the same thing, I love how direct you are. So it's like,
I'm very direct.
like, oh, she said what I meant to say, but just very clearly.
Yeah. It can come off as abrasive, but some people
Oh, I
enjoy
don't
that.
feel that. Maybe some people need that or enjoy it, but I don't see it as
Yeah.
abrasive. I just see it as very clear and direct, which I think is really helpful and beautiful. And I know that you have a very soft and generous heart and soul. So it's just a beautiful marriage of all the things. Do you mind just introducing yourself in your own words? Tell me a little bit about
Sure.
where you're at today in the world and yeah, just a little
Yeah,
bit.
it's been a bit of a journey. So let's see, where do we start? I'm currently the mind performance coach. And so I help executives, business owners, and business leaders to optimize their mental health and recognize that that's actually their greatest source of success. Is the more that you understand your unique mind and the ways to nurture it holistically, the greater you're going to be at what you're trying to achieve in life, and the easier it is to find happiness while also striving for that success. So mental health has been seen as it's kind of shifting from we don't talk about that to, okay, we have to incorporate that, but we still don't really, we're just doing it out of obligation, not because we see the strength in it. And so my work is to help people relate to mental health in a way that still, I think a lot of corporations and leaders are hesitant to dive into. And I guess that comes from a very long journey of my own hesitancy to talk or to deal with my own mental health. So I guess if we start from the beginning, I am an Air Force brat, and my dad was an efficiency expert as an enlisted member of the Air Force. And so we traveled all over growing up. My brother was diagnosed with a mental health disorder when he was very young. He was 12. And even before that was medicated for ADHD is what they thought it was at the time. So there was a lot of secrecy around mental health growing up in my family. And especially in the military, it's very much like, here's a mental health facility. It's there for you. Don't ever go there. Don't ever use it.
Yeah.
And so that kind of trickled into my perception of the way the world works. So by the time I was 18 and we'd been holding this family secret of my brother's diagnosis and trying to just navigate it in a very isolated position and with very little understanding of how to best support him and how to cope ourselves as a family, I went off into the world on my own with this very isolated perception of how to be. So by the time I was 18 and diagnosed with anxiety and depression, it was a shock for me, that diagnosis came from a suicide attempt that I had made at that time, just as I was completely overwhelmed with, I guess, leaning into the real world. And it still felt shocking to think that that's how low I had gotten. And it felt like a one-off situation. Like I just had a bad day. And so I didn't want to talk about it. I wasn't going to go get meds. I wasn't going to talk to therapists. And what we know about mental health is that if you don't take care of it, it only gets worse and it begins infiltrating all of the other areas of your life. And so I went into relationships and careers that didn't feel helpful, or that I was trying to appease a societal expectation for what happiness was supposed to look like or what success was supposed to look like. And that was a continued downward spiral. And I had another suicide attempt at 27. And again, it still was a shocking, not shockingly now looking back, it was not a wake-up call. It was still like, okay, so now we've had 2 bad nights in 10 years. Like, that's not that bad.
Wow. That's interesting that you said that, because I was thinking that after you mentioned the first one at 18, that it seems like that would have been like a wake-up call, or I wish there was a different word for that, but a point where you thought, oh, things are this bad, but you were still so ready to dismiss it. Like, it's just a bad day.
Exactly. Rather than a culmination of a series of events and poor habits and poor understandings of relational dynamics in general. So by the time I was 30, I was really trying to settle down and ended up in a therapist's office only as an agreement to go in the relationship that I was in, thinking, we're going to see this therapist. She's going to tell us everything that you are doing wrong, sir. And then we're going to fix you and we can get married and have the perfect life that I've been wanting to have after having divorced at 26. I'm going to have children. I'll continue thriving in my career and everything will be great.
Mhm.
And we broke up in the first session. But I think it was the first time that I was like, oh, I'm the common denominator in all of these problems. So I asked her to continue seeing her.
Wow.
And it was kind of transformational, and that she's the first therapist that I didn't like walk out on the first session. She also happened to be an executive coach. And then just kind of learning through her lens, because I was a very high achiever. I was great in my career. It didn't make sense that I had anxiety or depression, right? Like that's why none of these were wake up calls. I was doing everything I was supposed to have been doing.
Yeah.
And this is why I work with the clientele that I work with, because I know that they also don't see themselves as having these problems. And so she really helped me to see that a lot of it was not necessarily like poor. It didn't have to be a label that I kept. It could be something that I could work through. I just didn't have the tools to have worked through it. And that's why I was stuck in it for so long. Yeah. And that was really helpful, rather than giving me a diagnosis and being like, well, this is your problem to deal with forever. So here's your medication and just go be broken for the rest of your life. I was never going to relate to that. And so I kind of dove headfirst into my work with her. So much so, I always say that I went single white female on her. If you've seen that movie from the 80s.
I actually haven't. I really should though.
Yeah. I was like, how did you get here? I want to do everything that you did. I want to be just like you. And I did. I went back and got my master's degree and became a marriage and family therapist.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah. I was going to ask you when that came into your story, when you realized that this was part of your life's path, is also doing this work for others.
Yes.
And it was during those sessions.
That was in my own therapy sessions. I was already 30. And at that time I felt old and like I had my 30th birthday and I was like, I've achieved nothing I was supposed to achieve. I'm like, I hate my job, even though I'm really successful in hospitality on the Las Vegas Strip. I'm not married. I don't have the children that I want. And so I think that also kind of played into me finally giving into therapy. But I had initially been drawn to psychology, just the idea of psychology very early on. That's what I initially went to college for. But then as I saw my brother's diagnosis and really disagreed with the medical recommendations and the highly medication focused treatment plan that he was on, I really kind of distrusted the industry. And so therapy I saw as an outlet to kind of not be bought into that same cycle that I disagreed with, and be able to help people in a way that I had been helped myself. In a way that felt more transformative. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love that. And so this was at the beginning of 2019. And then 2020 hit, the lockdown hit. I realized I was still stuck in the mental health cycle of insurance-based therapies, and there's only so many therapists to go around. And my industry was lacking in talks of prevention and all of the habits that prevent you from ever getting to the point I got to, and then maintaining a healthier mental status, which I now see as the key to success. So that has been a lot of transformations, right? So eventually from therapist into still disagreeing with the system and working in corporate and with executives and people who have influence on other people and modeling the way that they live and how they view mental health and success, and how the two go hand in hand. Yeah, exactly. And I think in some ways, COVID gave us a little bit more permission to start talking about those things. And employees definitely started voicing this, felt more safe to voice this, the need for it. I feel like the conversation became a little less taboo, at least if you're watching like online social media spaces, right? And then I wonder how like the translation actually happens in the workplace. And it really does take leadership to be able to have those conversations beyond the social media post. Like, how do we actually serve our employees? How do we actually engage in this conversation? How do we still do meaningful work? Actually transform the way that our workplace is designed to make sure that we're truly taking care of those things, instead of saying, well, we offer corporate wellness trainings that the leadership team never attends. And so there's still a disconnect. And that's why I was saying mental health has become such a buzzword in a lot of companies, but they're not taking the true steps to actually transform the way that they think about mental health.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that building you were talking about on base. The mental health building is over there, but don't ever go into it.
Never go there.
Right.
Yeah.
A little bit like that. That's the reason why it's so important to have leadership getting involved. And now you're seeing this trend, even though we're starting to have these conversations of what they're calling the quiet quitting, right? These employees that are just like silencing and just kind of disappearing and going off the grid. And I don't think that's an employee problem. I really feel like that's a leadership problem. You are not seeing your employee. They are trying to tell you something and you have not been listening.
I agree. I agree to an extent, because the idea of quiet quitting is for so long, we have allowed our boundaries to be overridden, and we're giving everything to this job with very little in return. So, you can contact me at 11 o'clock at night and I'm available for you. And quiet quitting is very much like, okay, this is my job description. I am only giving you this because you've said that this is a transactional agreement, and I'm going to now keep it transactional, which in the past I have not.
Love that.
So I agree with that, but I think that there's also a level of personal accountability that if you feel there has been a override of boundaries, there's got to be a conversation. And perhaps it is that corporations or companies are not allowing or like creating a space for those conversations, or the conversation has been attempted and not heard, which is also, quiet quitting is following the Great Recession, where so many people were quitting and finding jobs that were more aligned with their values. So maybe it is that they have attempted to have the conversation and it wasn't heard. And so now they're just going to put their heads down and do what's expected of them. Right. But my hope is that for true transformation, nothing's quiet, right? You have to have the hard conversations. So for companies to find ways to initiate that is really important. And for employees to have I was going to say balls, but this is
you can say it.
I know, but you primarily have women listeners, so to have the power to follow through and have those hard conversations, it'll go both ways, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the piece where finding your voice and being willing to have those conversations. Of course, so when I was going into it, I had, thought, you're right, that there are people who have had these conversations and are just simply not being heard. I know that there's, the workload keeps building and building and building, but until sometimes you're willing to say, this is a boundary. So this is a conversation around boundaries, right? And how do I get to be my most productive self, get to do the work that I came here to do, let it be meaningful and impactful while we're still respecting some of these boundaries and these agreements that we've made that I now feel like are being breached.
Right.
So how can employees even begin that conversation in a way that feels empowering and, there is some hope for some change or some resolution around it rather than just sort of some nice pandering around it.
Right. Are you asking how they can?
You know what? If you have some tips, yes.
Oh, no, I didn't. But
okay. I was just musing on it. No, I was musing on it. But I think it's a good conversation to have. It's one that I've had with some of my clients. And it's not just people in leadership that are feeling dissatisfied with their jobs or stuck. I think that there are people out there that genuinely like what they do, but they are not feeling the satisfaction from it. And how they can re-engage the work that they do without feeling like they have to just quit.
Right. I agree. I think, and when I started my journey and became a therapist, because I was successful in my career in hospitality, which is our primary, workforce here in Las Vegas, and it's a very small town. I was attracting a lot of people that were like, I want to do what you did and quit my job. And I saw it over time as almost very dangerous because not everybody is cut out for entrepreneurship. And there's a lot of people who are very good in their industries and are really driven by it. And they're simply in the wrong places. And I think that as time goes by and the Great Recession continues and these small businesses begin to fail, because it takes an incredibly, strong-willed and almost crazy person to survive entrepreneurship.
Agreed.
It's really not cut out for everybody. We have a great opportunity for corporations to make the shifts to keep their employees if they are willing to make the shifts, because it's also not going to work with everybody having their own businesses. And over time, I was like, this is really dangerous for me to just be modeling for people that the easiest way out is just to quit and start over, because that's not the case. That's an easy way out, honestly.
Yeah. And then, like you said, I'm not sure that it actually is the easy. It feels like a temporary fix. It's not really the solution.
It's like venting the teapot, and then you're like, what?
Yeah. Well, because like you and I both know, we have, clients and people in leadership positions. Like you said, they're very successful by everything on the outside, and they are still feeling like they're not experiencing the joys of that success. They're not feeling the satisfaction from that success. They've built something really wonderful, or they've gotten to that place of achievement. And you said your dad was literally an efficiency
expert. Yep.
Yeah.
He still is. He works for Wells Fargo now.
Right. So, imagine, like, nothing is more like structural than that. But where do you find the joy and satisfaction and the pleasure within that when you feel like you've built this thing that's perfect or even imperfect, but it's successful and it's doing really well, and still take care of yourself so that you're able to enjoy the success of that?
Absolutely. And honestly, that is a lot of the work that I do with clients too, because there's a lot of blame to go onto corporate culture, but a lot of it is also the patterns that we create in driving our success. You have to be a certain way, or society has told us for a very long time that it takes a certain drive and a certain work ethic and a certain sacrifice of other values in order to prioritize your career. And then you can relax, right? But that's not how your mind operates. Your mind doesn't create a pattern and a habit and do this same thing every single day and then find the positive reinforcement and then just let go of that and be like, okay, now that I've built this thriving career, I can relax. Your brain doesn't operate that way. And that's where a lot of my clients are stuck, is I'm exactly where I want to be. So I'm making all of this money. Why can't I get my brain to turn off? Why can't I prioritize more time with my kids? Because we've taught ourselves for so long that that's just not what the positive reinforcement or the success feels like. And so you have to learn a new feeling and learn to step into the discomfort of success feeling and looking very different than you've always told yourself it was in the driving portion of your career building.
Yeah. So where do you start for someone like that?
Well, so I offer 3 barrier breakthrough sessions in my current program, The Rewire, which is a 6-month program, because change doesn't happen overnight, right? Like, I can't just offer an 8-week course for you to learn all of these things. And in those barrier breakthrough sessions, we work through it's based in EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's also based in some brain spotting and parts therapy. I want to disclaim, since I'm not a licensed therapist, as I've left the industry, this is not therapy. It's all EMDR informed, et cetera. So it's kind of a combination of things that I found helpful that I do with these clients. But what it is really identifying the limiting beliefs that have stuck and are no longer helpful to you. And so this is actually really a fun thing to explain. So, and this is probably something you also teach in a different way.
Right. I love it.
So our limiting beliefs, or our subconscious, is written between the ages of 0 and 10. Our brains are not developed, right, until the age 25. So your prefrontal cortex is not where it's meant to be. You're thinking very black and white thinking. Everything's very egocentrical. You're built to survive as a child. So as you're going through experiences and you're learning the way that life and perception and your worldview, the way that things are, just the way that things are.
Yeah.
You don't have the awareness of the abstract thinking or the empathy that an adult has. And you actually have very limited understanding of the world. So something as simple as not being picked on the dodgeball court can write as a part of your perception and a part of your who you are, as I'm not good enough or I don't belong. And those subconscious beliefs can carry on with you for the rest of your existence. And then you find yourself doing all of these weird cyclical patterns, whether it's in relationships or in work, where you don't belong or you still no longer feel like you are good enough. And then all of your actions continue to support that. And we're not taught that those aren't actual experiences. Like that experience looked at from an adult, it had nothing to do with you not being good enough, or it had nothing to do with you not belonging. And instead, with these two kids were best friends, or the teacher separated, or, there's always a greater understanding that an adult perception would see completely differently. And so the barrier break session will go in, identify these limiting beliefs, and reprocess them from the adult perspective. And that's very important, because 95% of our actions on a day-to-day basis are based and automated on subconscious beliefs. We're very rarely not doing something out of habit or consciously making our decisions. So understanding your subconscious is incredibly important, and making sure that it's in alignment with your adult functioning brain is also really important.
Yeah. And I think it's, once you start diving into this work, it's really fascinating to see how some of those things creep into your day-to-day life, like that you're just so not aware of, or the way it creeps into your work, or in almost every arena of your life. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that thing was now like morphed into this obstacle that I now have in some way. And so being able to really, like, I like to say, dive into it, just really mine it for the gold that it is. Like, let's get in there and dig out that nugget of gold, because this is like some deep truth in here. And how can we
100%.
use that to really use it now going forward? And I don't actually know that much about EMDR. Do you want to touch on how that works?
Sure. So EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's currently a therapy that is the most evidence-based and fastest way of treating trauma. So I know that the VA uses it. You would use it for people who experience acute trauma, like here in Las Vegas, we had the 1 October shooting. EMDR therapists were sent on site to start taking care of those people. But as a performance coach, I'm using it, as I said, in a way that was really helpful to me too, throughout my journey of learning and expanding, in that, as somebody who didn't identify as having grown up in a childhood that had a traumatic experience, my initial gut instinct was, I don't need a trauma-based therapy, right? I just need you to make me operate better. And I'm using it in that same function with my clients. So it helps you to harness both the left and the right hemispheres of your brain through bilateral stimulation of the two hemispheres. Myself and most of my clients are left-brained and very logical, sequential. Everything is cause and effect, makes perfect sense. And I explain it to them as though you go to the gym and you only worked out one side of your body. A very logical, high-achieving person is only going to rely on that strength, and very rarely will make time for the creative side, because they convince themselves that it's unhealthy or just an unuseful way to spend time. And it's not. We have to, if you only went to the gym and worked out on the one side that you're most dominant in, you'd be incredibly unbalanced. And I explained to them that their brains are also that way, and their limiting beliefs are holding them there because it's on this side of the brain. So it stimulates both sides of the brain. And I call it like putting you into your sweet spot, where you're a little bit more tapped into your emotions. And it also taxes the working memory. So if it's a distressful memory that we're going to go back to, it helps you to remain calm and a healthier mindset to kind of process that overwhelming memory.
Yeah. I feel like the mind will always show you what you're ready to see. So even if it is a distressing memory, it's not going to give you anything that you're not ready to look at, I believe.
Yes.
And I do this similar work with my clients. And you're right. It's sometimes, like I said, you don't always know what story's attached to this belief or this behavior or this thought until you start going into it. And then you're like, oh my God, it was that. Or, you know, you just start to see all the dots connect. And you're right. Sometimes it does go back to something that's really hard to look at. But I do believe that it's showing you for a reason. So whenever it comes up.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one thing that I've seen as a negative in some of the therapies of treating trauma specifically, but the idea of exposure therapy, where you just keep forcing yourself to look at it until it becomes less distressing. That doesn't seem logical to me.
Yeah.
And EMDR is very much like, we're going to go wherever your brain takes you, and wherever your brain takes you is right. And it all makes sense. And so we get into like really crazy things where like we're identifying their anger as a lemon tree, and then they're talking to this lemon, and for an incredibly logical, like CPA, that feels crazy, but somehow it's way less stressful to think of this overwhelming problem that they have. And they haven't had the emotional capability or the abstract thinking to allow them to get there without the EMDR. So it's a really, really cool process, and I love it.
Yeah. So see, we do work very similarly.
Yeah, I told you. I think it's all the same. It's just the way that you say it is, yours is just much more graceful.
You're so wonderful. No, I love the power of the work that you do. This is so good because I have, like I said, I have not dove into EMDR myself, but I am curious about it. So that's another great thing to come from this conversation, and for our listeners too, because it's a word that I think is being used a lot, or therapy that's being used a lot right now. And I'm just even not sure how it works, or if somebody was curious about learning more about it, where would you go? Who would, where would you turn to? And how do you activate both sides of the brain like that?
So you can activate both sides of your brain. And I think it's really interesting. It's a natural coping mechanism that we intuitively practice all the time, right? If you're nervous and you're in a swivel chair, you're swiveling back and forth, bilateral stimulation. If you have a newborn baby, you're rocking it back and forth. Either that's bilateral stimulation for you, or when the baby is upset, what do we start doing? We like bounce it or go back and forth. And that's bilateral stimulation for the baby if it's on its side. So like we have all of these really natural tendencies. You get overwhelmed, you go for a walk. That's bilateral stimulation. Some people really feel like, me included, their best way of thinking is through running, bilateral stimulation. So we're doing these things all the time. Wow. And you can certainly practice it on your own. And so Francine Shapiro, the founder of EMDR, founded it by going through a walk in the woods, and she noticed that her eyes were darting back and forth looking at the trees. And then she started processing memories that she couldn't do until she kept going back to this forest. And so over time, it's debated whether it truly has to have the eye movement included, or if it's just the stimulation. So you can see tapping. Some people have buzzers. I also do a form of brain spotting, which is kind of a similar concept, which can be hearing different sounds on both sides. So if you listen to 8D audio, which I recently learned about, that's a form of bilateral stimulation.
Yeah, I have tuned into that. That is so fascinating to listen to, and incredibly hypnotic.
Yes. Yeah. And I do also want to clarify that EMDR and hypnosis are not related, and EMDR can only be practiced by a licensed therapist. So that's why I don't practice it as a therapy. I simply use it to inform my treatment in the barrier breakthrough. If you're looking to go and have an EMDR session, you're going to be looking for trauma-informed therapists in your area to have that. Or I offer barrier breakthrough sessions as one-on-ones on my website.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you making that distinction and having that clarification around it. I think it sounds like a really useful tool to help you engage this part of your mind and start the exploration. I love that. And like anything, I think, you do have to be careful when you use the word therapy, but whether it's art therapy or what something is offering you some sort of relief or pathway to getting the clarity you desire. It can be interpreted in so many ways. So it's helpful to have some language around it. So I appreciate that too.
No, of course. And I also just always want to be forthcoming, because the reason I left licensure is I feel like it's so limiting to how much help the world needs. And it can get tricky. I just don't ever want to get myself in trouble, but I've left because my driving force is helping people, and all of the red tape that comes along with,
I understand. Yes, I do understand.
Anything that's overseen by a board, which is a great thing, but also has its weaknesses. So I'm hoping that they start changing things over time.
Yeah, and you can make it more accessible. You can speak to it a little bit more clearly and more plainly, and say what you mean, and reach who you need to reach, and get your message out there in the work that you do. Yeah.
Yes.
You can have a broader impact, is what it's feeling like to me. Yeah. So tell me what's next for you. What are you working on currently?
So currently I am branching more into a corporate setting and trying to figure out exactly what kind of container I'd like to use that'll overarchingly help more corporations. But I'm doing it currently on a bespoke process for the corporations that are reaching out to me. So before, I've been primarily working with individuals, high achievers, and business owners. Now we're seeing the ability to implement this to my first corporate client is a sales team in Memphis, really diving into making sure that they're performing at their best by understanding the things that are perhaps holding them back. And I think that what companies are going to start realizing, my hope is that that's what I help them to understand, is it's usually not the things at work that are limiting people from performing their best or hitting their goals. It's the things at home that are going on, right? It's that you're hiding that you're going through a divorce, or that your children are having a bad day, and that's weighing on your mind. And that makes it really hard to go to a meeting and lead the meeting. And so the more we kind of blur those lines of, you have to compartmentalize work and home life by creating more tools and understanding for people to navigate the dynamics at home, the better they'll perform at work, and the happier they'll be to come to work, where they're like, well, thank God today we have that training on having hard conversations with your husband or whatever, or, so I'm looking forward to that, because we've had this cold shoulder standoff for the last week, and I really need it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's so necessary. It's so needed. I can imagine the transformative experiences that could happen in the workplace and how desperately they're needed. I did my turn in corporate for a while, and just that there's this messaging that comes from these team buildings, like, that we're a family and that we have your back, and like, you're meant to like give your whole life over to this company. It's your family now. And it's just, it just doesn't add up. And I'm just so glad we're shifting the conversation and that away from like, no, I have a family. I want to come here and do meaningful work and collaborate and do great work. But I actually have a family that I really want to like, not have to like put that relationship in harm's way to do this job. Right.
Or if we truly are a family and I'm just having a bad day because I'm a human being, you can't tell me to buck up and leave them at home.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
that's the missing piece of saying we're family. Yes. Exactly.
So we're either a family or we're very separate, but either way a company goes, they need to be clear and provide tools either way.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that language I felt like was used mostly to, get us all to play volleyball together or something. But when it came to actual support from the family, it was lacking. Yes.
I'm loving seeing that on LinkedIn right now. Everybody's saying, corporate culture is not ping pong tables and pizza parties. It's more days off or better vacation time, or, And so I love that it's all slowly starting to shift in the right way.
Yeah. We're having the conversations, and wonderful people like you out there, like just pushing through those barriers, showing how it can be done. Right. So if we don't have people showing us how, right, it's great to have the conversation, but then what?
Yes, exactly. And a lot of times, as I've seen in my work up until now, because these are the leaders of companies, they don't have the tools to recognize when somebody else is suffering, because they're also kind of suffering in silence.
Yeah.
And so again, making sure we're training leaders just like you are to be more in alignment and better connected to what truly matters, going to help them practice better empathy and hopefully
get that holistic lens on their business to look at. Yeah. I love that. Oh, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much for being here. This has been such a good conversation. I'm curious, before we wrap up, is there anything else on your mind or something else you wanted to share that felt potent?
No, this has been a great and really easy conversation. I didn't realize a whole hour has almost gone by.
It does go quick.
This is amazing. And I'm just so honored to have been asked to come and speak with you. I'm very touched by the work that you do. And I think that it is incredibly powerful. I did want to leave your audience an offering. I have a free trauma response quiz that I can give you the information for.
Yes, so that please tell me more about that. Yes.
So as I said, most of my clients, and perhaps yours, wouldn't identify themselves as having trauma to overcome. I mean, that could be a whole other conversation, but the way that I see trauma is it creates unhelpful coping skills, regardless of what the experience was. And a lot of times for high achievers, that ends up being the plateau portion of their career, or feeling like they simply can't accomplish things or that they can't accomplish enough. And so identifying what barriers are showing up in your day-to-day are stemming from a trauma response. And then that way you have at least the direction to start going and knowing what you need to overcome to start showing up in your work and in your daily life the way that you'd like to.
I love that. And I love that explanation around it. It's so important to see how your body responds to it. And that is a trauma response. And I don't think most people would identify it that way. You know, how you're reacting to a certain situation or how you're responding in a certain situation is a response. And how is that actually holding you back? So what is that thing that's like suddenly causing you to like contract and be like, I can't do that? Or how are you even taking that next step? Or how is that happening? Or limiting you or building you up in some way? I love that. Okay. So we are going to have the link to that in the show notes for sure. I'm going to take it myself. I'm very curious. I feel like I have all the trauma responses. So it'll be interesting.
You'll have one dominant one, at least one or two, but it's normal to have all four of them.
Yeah. Yeah. But probably, like you said, one's most likely the more dominant one. Yeah.
And then that'll give you a clue as to what that trauma is that needs to be processed and overcome.
Yeah. I love that. So we did our Enneagrams together. Remind me again what yours was. Were we both 7s? No, you're an 8.
I'm a 7.
I'm
a 7.
Yeah.
I think I show as an 8. I think that's why it was so emotional for me is I would have never identified myself as a 7. And so when Tracy was talking about how like it's like a wounded 7 appears as an 8, then they kind of like limit their, that we're visionaries. They limit their expanded dreaming and go very by the book. And so it was like she gave me permission to be like, I do want to change the world. And I have felt limited and that feels too crazy. And that was an emotional quiz to get results for, but I'm definitely a 7. I'm out here to change like entire structures and the way the entire world thinks. So.
That makes so much sense because I'm a 7 too, and it's all making so much more sense. But I was wondering where the 8 came from. Like, why did I think there was an 8 for you somewhere? So that makes sense what she was explaining about that now and why that came up for me when I was thinking about it. But I thought of that because of just even the trauma response quiz. 7s are known for like, you know, doing all the things or having all the tabs open or doing all the tasks. And I'm like, well, of course I have all the responses. So there's no way I have just one dominant. I mean, yes, for everything.
Yeah. You can't pigeonhole me, right?
Typical 7. Yeah. Anyways, I love that. I'm curious to take it. I'm sure it's going to be like a very powerful conversation starter, a good lead point for people to see like, okay, start noticing this and how I can begin to even just shift that energy in a really powerful way.
Right. Stop self-sabotaging and identify why you're doing it to begin with, essentially.
Yes, I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I know we're just scratching the surface. I am sure you'll be back and we'll have many more conversations.
Thank you. I'd love to. This has been amazing. Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you here with me. It's an honor to have you tuning in each week. I want you to know that no matter where you're at and no matter what transition you're facing, you are supported and loved. You are whole and you are more than capable as you are in this moment. You always have been. If you're ready to lean into a life of purpose, clarity, and joy through sisterhood, ritual, and intention, join us in the Connected Circle. Consider us your soul squad of women navigating all the transitions of life together. To join now, head over to my website, lisamalia.co, and join the Connected Circle at the very top of the page. I'll see you there. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this show, please share, subscribe, rate, and write a review. This helps the goddess of the algorithm guide other incredible people to find this show and supports the work we do here. It really does make a difference, and I would be so, so grateful. With all my love, have a beautiful day.